Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
Great. Doors open, 68 degrees here. Few clouds in the sky.
Well, we are about to hit one of the coldest weeks in the past 10 years. And I must say that that scene behind you is going to look quite different when the 12 to 20 inches of white stuff fall over the coming
Boy.
days.
In some ways, I envy the other part of the country, which is a lot of people who will be experiencing. Fortunately, I hope it's happening on the weekend. Where I know there are a lot of people that do work on weekends
Right.
and do have to, as the kinds of jobs they have to get through this and work. And I don't like it for them. But if you're going to have it happen, a weekend is probably better than other times. But kids love it.
Kids love it. But I think a lot of businesses are going to be closed because the situation's going to be very bad.
And there are people in the southern hemisphere that are wondering what are we talking about, and people that are in other
Correct.
states, right, that aren't in the East Coast
Correct.
and up into the Southeast. So we should get off this topic. We were talking about agentic AI in 71 series. We're now moving on into 72, and this is the second part of the discussion between a board chair and the CEO. You're playing the role of the CEO, I'm playing the role of the board chair. And what we got to in 72-1, the first part of the discussion between you and me as a sitting in your office kind of a discussion, it was about now wanting to move since we had done a fair amount of work with educating both the team and the board on the fundamentals of AI used in the enterprise and how it can be best used for more complex things. We were talking about one of the architectures of AI, which is the agentic architecture, and we talked in 72-1, we talked a lot about what is exactly an agent, or what is exactly an AI agent, and why is that an important part of what an AI architecture looks like for the enterprise. Now, we're going to get into a good deal more about that here, and very specifically about it, and how it fits in the architecture for an AI layer within an organization. But with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you now, Deirdre, to bridge us into getting into our roles, and then we're going to proceed from there.
All right. We're going to continue with the basic scenario where you're playing a board chair, I'm playing a CEO. And for the past, it's almost 10 videos by now, the CEO has been trying to figure out how to talk with the board about a greater use of AI and the use of AI agents, particularly in the organization. And along the way, we've had to stop, we've had to train the board, we've had to train the management team, we've had to figure out what sorts of work can be done. And now in the 72 series, we're pushing ahead with it that in 72 1A, the CEO came to you and said, okay, are we ready to talk with the board? Let's plan that conversation. And you said, in effect, wait a second. Are we ready? I know we've gone through the training, but it could be that there needs to be more intermediate work before we get to the full use of agents. And you asked me to go away and talk with my management team about their thoughts about using AI in the organization and particularly in their functions. So we're going to very shortly step into these roles again, but I'll also say that we're not going to stay in these roles too long. We're going to be too much explaining in this video to stay in the roles, but we'll flag when we're in the roles and out of the roles because there are some implications for what's going on in organizations right now. So with that, Tom, since I have the first
Please.
line in our scenario, all right, here I am as CEO, and I call you up and I say, Mr. Board Chair, I've been talking with my people and they're all excited and they have all figured out all sorts of uses of AI in their functions. So when can we go and talk with the board?
So it's great to see you. And I'm really glad that you and your colleagues from college got through the weekend that you experienced. And those of you who have seen 71-1, you understand the reference. Um, but uh, are so how much work did your people do, Deirdre, together to map out how they all interconnect? So if they said they had an important piece of work that needs to be done, did they do work with each other to try to identify and prioritize?
Interconnect? No, not at all. They were focusing on their own functions as they were doing this, thinking about things where AI might help in specific spots of work in each function.
So when you and they just think about the next step, what is your next step to begin to implement something that uses artificial intelligence in one form or another?
Well, we would work function by function to get each function doing at least one of the ideas that they had. For example, sales had an idea about using AI to do some research on prospects, and that's really good. So we'll get them set up doing it, and then I'll move on to maybe finance and see what they want to do. Isn't that what you wanted us to talk about?
So, you know, yes. I think we're at a point where I should show you something. Um, and because I think about the use of AI in the enterprise differently than that.
Yes, I definitely want to see how you're thinking because I thought we were doing the right thing, and clearly you don't like what we were doing.
So,
And now that I've said that, audience, we're
okay,
both going to
let's
step
go at
out
it.
of our
Okay.
roles to go to a presentation that Tom has
All
prepared.
right. So, we're fortunate because we've just seen those of you who have watched any of the materials that were not political coming out of Davos, especially the ones that involved tech, but specifically that involved people like Alex Karp describing how tech is being used in his business for specific clients of his. And for those of you that are not that familiar with Palantir, it's essentially a commercial DARPA, is the
Mhm.
way you might think about it. Very high level, high quality people that are on the outside that are providing a very high level set of capabilities to both the defense groups in the country, both commercial and government, and also the intelligence agencies of our government and bridging over to some allies where it's relevant. Same thing on the defense side. And Palantir is a leader in that and a leader in the use of AI to enable that. Now, uh, I've been involved in some things for the last year or so that involve that. So I know it, but I didn't feel really comfortable describing it. But I put a presentation in place to describe it, which does no more talk about it than what Karp did. And Karp obviously had felt free to discuss it at the WEF. And if that being said, with me having watched all that, I feel now comfortable I can do this. And this will begin to show this gap we're talking about between the CEO and the board chair because I happen to see it differently because I work with it and have
Right,
been working with it for a year. You know that personally. Not, you
right.
don't know the details of what I'm doing, but you know I've been working on these things. But now we can talk about it and what does that really mean? And how might you be able to, from it, infer how you could use it in the enterprise? And that's the purpose behind this. I've got 10 or pages or so, Deirdre. So we're stepping out of our roles. obviously Deirdre understands this. She understands the presentation, and we just felt it was good to do that. So Deirdre, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull this slide presentation up.
Please do. And while you're pulling it up, I want to make a comment that you and I were talking about yesterday, that the whole WEF has always been focused on finance. This year, for the first time, it was not focused on finance, it was focused on AI. And if you read the descriptions, you'll read about all of the tech companies having their booths, giving presentations, leading panels, talking on panels themselves, all aimed at AI. It's a fascinating shift in the topics covered at the WEF.
It is. And we were also commenting about how uh, I don't think I've ever watched anything more than a handful of seconds of things that have happened at any WEF conference ever.
Right.
Now, that may stereotype me as thinking a certain way, but I just didn't think it had relevance to me personally. This time I watched everything I could get my hands on that not politically, although I was interested in some of the topics. So I did watch some of that. And I know you did too, Deirdre, for a different set of reasons. But here I watched everything about tech I could, and I know you did too. We both watched the Larry Fink interview as best you could with Karp. Also, I watched, you haven't had a chance yet, you will, Elon Musk's 30 plus minutes, where he described his vision of why his vision for improving the lives of people and sustaining humanity.
Mhm. Right.
And so these are subjects that that's what you and I concern ourselves with. So we want to do this. So let's talk a little bit about this. This is where we talk about this, that there is a lot of AI hype, and Deirdre you monitor the traditional press way closer than I do. I monitor much more of the tech-oriented press, the deep tech-oriented press, and then the context in which I'm doing these special projects, which happens to be global in nature and not as much political, but just geopolitical um, things that are happening and trends. But one thing is clear, there is an AI hype cycle, but it seems to be retreating a little bit. And Deirdre, you might want to give a little bit of context about what you're seeing in the traditional press and the traditional business press also,
Correct.
and tech press too.
Correct. And my comments are going to be reflected in your slides, Tom, that it almost seemed for a long time as if the mainstream business press, business media, were just picking up the press releases from the tech companies and printing them in their papers, believing everything about the hype. We're going to hit AGI tomorrow. Humans will lose all of their jobs, that will be run by machines, et cetera, et cetera. I am getting a sense, and particularly over the past 2, 3 months, that everyone is tired of the hype. That we're at the point now where businesses are saying, okay, you've got me. I'll use AI, but I need to do it within a business context. That is, I need to do it in a way that provides measurable results, that provides an ROI, that allows me to deliver the results I want, meet my goals, all of those standard business things. And so the messaging in the press has shifted in that way, where actually some of the tech company leaders are being questioned about what they're doing or whether their companies will even survive because of the direction they're taking their companies. Certainly because of some of the aspects of some of the models that have been released, people are questioning the validity of the models. And whether we're getting to a point where, say, the internet is being taken over by AI slop, therefore making the internet not useful at all. And how do we stop this from happening? How do we retain the good parts of the internet and keep the slop away? Very brief preview, Tom, but I think we'll go into this more as we go through your presentation.
Yes, there is a way that you can unlock great leverage here within the organization. We've been doing multiple series of videos on different ways you can unlock the leverage for yourself personally as a top level leader, CEO, board chair, and even at steps below. Uh, One of the best helpful ways, at least one helpful way I think of thinking about this, is it helps to re-envision the way you look at the space and looking at it in terms of instead of operating functions with data, which is where you were a minute ago in your role play,
Right.
where you were talking about an operating function with data, and I was going to pursue that.
Right.
It's to step back and think in terms of assets, key assets with data that are generating data, and in breaking the barrier of functions so that those assets, and then you think about data harmonization versus synthesis. In other words, we used to talk about when you thought about operating functions with data, to be able to use that data across function, you had to harmonize it. That's a term, the ETL term that many of us use, or the way you standardize data. And we
Right.
talked about data harmonization, where you standardize it to a point where you can use it together. And these were the ideas of big data warehouses, and all this sort of thing that you had to run them through tools and do things to make it so the data can work together. These days, synthesizing data that is not harmonized is really the perhaps the next step beyond function with data, going to key assets with data, and then saying in that data, don't even think about the harmonization of it, think about the synthesis of it in those terms. I think that's perhaps the way to start, and I hope that's making some sense to people, but we'll go through it in more detail. Um, so the big the big pushback we're seeing now, and it was clear also in Davos, you could hear Fink's comment about this when he was interviewing Karp, was the point about return. That we're just not seeing, in many cases, the return that we would expect to see from the investments that have been made or that people would like to make because they believe they have to make. And so we'll give you some Davos numbers here that they were talking about 82% of CEOs. They're optimistic about AI and what AI can do for them, and that it, in fact, is a top priority for two-thirds. But I'm not absolutely sure, based on the questions I heard or the comments I heard, that the people that are saying this actually really know what it can do for them. That's the disconnect for me, Deirdre, that the people in the room, the comments, the questions indicated a gap. They were optimistic about it. Top three priority. They just don't internalize the how and then the ultimate what.
Correct. And I think there are a couple of factors in play here. Obviously, with technology and AI being one of the themes of the conference, people who are attending are going to say they're optimistic about it. They're going to be using it. But more to the point, I'm wondering whether these figures, the 82% of CEOs more optimistic, two-thirds of them are going to make it a priority, whether that reflects some pressure by boards of directors onto them, saying that, look, and this is the very dynamic that you and I are playing out in our 71 series and our 72 series. Where even though it was the CEO who said back in the 71 series, we should be talking about this. You, as the board director, have been now pushing the CEO in the use of AI, how the AI will be used. I mean, look at the snippet we just filmed that I ran into your office saying, yeah, I've got my people talking about it. And you're saying, not so fast. Are they talking about it in a way that's going to deliver an ROI for the organization? So you always have to treat statistics like this carefully. I'm saying, think about what's underlying these statistics. What really interests me is the next line. The 50% say that job stability depends on getting AI right. Now think about this. This is 50% of the CEOs at Davos. That is, their companies paid for them to go to Davos, which means they're probably in very good standing. And now 50% of them say, look, if I don't get this right, they're going to fire me. That's an incredible statistic. And it's also playing out, by the way, in our scenario, in our videos. I think you were the one back in series 71 to point out that my character, the CEO, just might not make it because she's not getting what this AI stuff is really about.
Yes. I also thought it was interesting that 42% cite tech transformation as a top concern. So here, so it's hard to read that one, right? Because to me and to you, the biggest problem is this transformation, but it's not the actual tech that's the issue. It's the way that you think about using it that is the issue. So it's a strange, now again, polls are strange and they can give you misleading results. But this is interesting. The other thing that's interesting, Deirdre, that is I took this also as not just 50% of CEOs' jobs, but all jobs lack stability unless you get AI right. Meaning, if you screw up AI, you can actually produce instability in your own workforce
I
because you're not competitive. I don't know how many people were thinking in that way or this, but either way, you and I would say, I think they're right. Right?
I think so. And also, I do want to point out that CEOs say 66% of the CEOs called AI a top three priority, but only 42% cite tech transformation as a top concern. Now, what does that say about how they're thinking about AI?
Yeah.
In other words, I don't think they are really focusing on how to do this AI
Yeah.
stuff.
Because you would say it'd have to be way higher. Right.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
30% revenue uplift. I don't get that. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. My intuition and what I would really like to know is not 30% report of revenue. That says a third of the people say that they've seen a benefit from AI, but they just talk about a revenue uplift. And I don't even know what that means in this context.
And we also have to remember that AI is not just the generative AI or the LLMs, that
Right.
AI for many people can involve robotics, can involve automation, and so forth. And my guess is that when people are making the connection between those forms of AI and revenue, they may see an uplift. Alternatively, the process automation may reduce costs, which also raises profit. So you have to read these numbers carefully.
Yeah. I don't intuitively I buy the other two more than I buy that one.
Right,
Mostly because you and I continue to hear the complaint that there's just not enough return being shown. Notice this is not a return number. This is a revenue uplift number,
right,
which could be speed, right? One of the aspects of speed is getting product to the market more to meet the demand.
right,
That is clearly an optimistic point and one that has opportunity to be solved in the way we're going to get about talking about this, getting into talking about this.
right.
But the common outcome, and this is probably the most important thing, they start with excitement, they do pilots, they realize their limited scale, and then they're disappointed because they don't see a return commensurate with the excitement, or even the ability to expand, meaning scale.
Correct.
So let's talk about when you're trying to re-envision how to think about this. This is a really ugly um, metaphor, Deirdre, but I'm going to use it to just take a break from the hard intellect, as you like to say, take a breather for a second, and just say, look, if you were going to make a road trip that's a high stakes road trip, you have to be back east. You're going to call it cross country, and you have to be back there at a certain time, and you can't fly. You would say, all right, if I've got a group of people that need to do that, I'm going to assign different people traditionally, which makes a lot of sense. Logistics, agenda, budget, safety, whatever, the transportation alternatives, etc. Then what you're left with is what we always are left with. You're left with this compartments of data. We've talked about this. We used to call it years ago islands of data that somehow you've got to try to find a way to connect. And we have various forms of doing that today, but they're not, it's not easy. And those applications that are intended to do this become rigid. They become rigid to deal with and not comprehensive, or the ones that are comprehensive are rigid. And by definition, because they're traditional computing applications and they're not in the more artificially intelligently designed platforms. And the results are constantly going to be wasted energy, hopefully not delays, but so forth. So when you think about the world in these islands of data, and you think about using existing applications today to help you with that, you start, almost all of us that have been around this world for a long time start getting into, oh my gosh, now I'm going to get into having to learn a new application, or I'm going to get into deep project management, and it's going to be more complex, and so I'm going to try it on a spreadsheet, and we all know where that goes. So now what if we reframe that idea from functions, meaning budget, logistics, transportation alternatives. We changed that to looking at assets and assets with data. Like I've said, we traditionally divided into sales, ops, finance, and so forth. But if you think about what we're really wanting to do is take and create the key assets of the company. And the traditional way of thinking about it, if you just think about assets, you think about inventory, customers, prospects. Here we're saying equipment or infrastructure, and that would be the pieces of the infrastructure that are critical. And then the skills, not the talent necessarily, but the actual skills and the skills matching and where the critical skills are. And then the valuable data that each one of those assets produces. So you're shifting away from who owns what to how can the assets be mapped out with their interaction. And this was where we started in a few minutes ago, Deirdre, when we were in the roles, where I asked, okay, well, what were they doing to try to say, how do I connect? What is my influence on that? And you and I have been through so many of these things when we're doing right
Right.
application implementations and
Right.
right improving process and oh my gosh. So what is the problem with that? Well, when you get in today's world of thinking about organizational functions and you get the mechanics of trying to interweave these, you invariably run up into issues of what I call data issues, or what someone might call standardizing data, or standardizing an application that's horizontal. And those of us that have played in this game for a long time, usually we don't like to hear those words because they usually mean rigidity, usually. And but what you heard Karp say is, look, we're going to be divided to those that have figured this out and those that haven't. And they're the haves and the have-nots. Now, Karp is hard to understand sometimes a little bit. He's engaging as all get out, and I love the way he communicates. But not everybody does, and not everybody understands what he said. But what he's saying here is, look, there's a different way to look at this and a different way to deal with it. And that's what we're going to get to now. Any comments, Deirdre, before I move on?
Yeah, yes, simply want to jump in that if you remember our snippet of conversation about 10 minutes ago, this is exactly where the CEO got hung up.
Yeah.
That the CEO was thinking actually on the previous slide about having her people work by functions as opposed to really getting into the way that AI can be used generally. Now, remember that all of the management team had been through training. And the CEO knew that some were more comfortable with AI than others. But this starts to say that maybe that training wasn't useful enough. Maybe this is why we need this intermediary step. But it also means that none of the management team, or at least the CEO and at least some of her management team, have not started to think in terms of the tech transformation, the whole change management needed when you're doing something like bringing AI into an organization at the level that we're talking about. And that's going to have to be a theme going forward, that you can't simply dump an agent into one function without thinking through all of the other aspects in the other functions and how to relate it. And should it just be one agent or should we do multiple agents or whatever? And clearly the CEO is not there yet in terms
Yes,
of
that's
this
exactly
thinking.
right, Deirdre. And I know for people that don't understand this quite yet, and we haven't unfolded all the pieces, you're still going to say, well, we've tried this before. We know this. We know how complicated it is. And we've seen it, and there's been various IT architectures. But what we've lacked is this way to synthesize data versus standardize or harmonize. That's what we've lacked. So the first step is exactly what you were just describing, Deirdre. It's this connection map, which in the terms of people like Karp or people like that, they would call this a strategic blueprint for the organization. It's the assets that are linked, how the assets linked, and their data flows among the links that deliver results. And this is a tricky, a difficult piece, but we do this today. So you and I do it as in entrepreneurism when
Right,
we talk and help people decide how to build a business.
right,
We do this with a model, and we do it financially, but operationally and financially. What
right,
this is saying is to now take advantage of how you can actually execute this well, take one other step, look at it in terms of assets. And you and I have been teaching assets for a long time, right? We have a thinking about this concept, so it's not new to us, but thinking about them as assets, their interconnection and the data flows. We do this today. We do it in operations and cash. We link where does cash go? Where does it come from based on operational actions in the business? And we put together what's called a financial model,
right,
but not a budget. It's a financial model. How does operational activity yield cash? Now we're saying, all right, let's go back and instead of thinking it about it that way, let's think about it in terms of assets that are producing data that produce the result of what you want. So let's take it and look at it slightly differently and look at the results of it being key data instead of cash and say, how does it link together and how does it work to deliver the result that we're trying to deliver in the business, the key results of the business? And you're making these connections both horizontally and vertically, meaning you're doing the supply chain all the way through to market forecasts. But you're also checking the customer demand into the talent asset. Do you have enough of the talent to deliver the demand? And then do you have the right equipment? Do you have the right sensor data coming out of the equipment that's going to produce that? And then can you actually go and do predictive maintenance that comes back? We've seen all these. We've seen them all before, where we've seen how predictive maintenance alerts can be really valuable. And what you've had to do is find a way to get the data into the right application so that you could use it well. So now you've got this map of assets and data flows and key assets and data flows, and you're ignoring the problem of harmonizing the data. So the data can be in whatever form. So you've got all these scattered sources now. You've got CRM data, sensor data, notes, ERP, on and on and on. But you're actually looking at it as one picture. And you notice we didn't talk about data harmonization yet. We talked about no mass data integration yet. We just talked about the data existing in the enterprise. Then you start talking about an AI layer. Because what AI does incredibly well with today's LLMs, and it will only get better, it can take unstructured, disparate data from various forms and synthesize it into a meaningful result without any data migration, data warehouse, data harmonization. And once you understand that concept, you realize that a layer of ability to manage that in an enterprise that goes from front to back or back to front can be incredibly powerful, especially if you've understood your organizational result well, right? And this is the point you and I make about entrepreneurism. If you understand now how you can translate your idea into something that actually produces that idea and how the cash flows in and out, we're saying if you want to now really run it well and effectively and efficiently, now define key assets, define the key data flows, and how could you be using a layer of AI to be supporting you in that process? Now, Deirdre, before I move on, I'm going to, and to Karp's point here, I'm going to let you take this and add your piece to it.
Well, he's talking about civil liberties. This actually brings transparency to the entire organization. That when you're talking about the data flows and the processes and the interactions and so forth, you need to be absolutely explicit in what you're doing. There's no fudge room here. And that is something that's a almost a psychological difference for a lot of companies. A lot of companies just sort of run, they don't think through a lot of their operations. If you're going to do AI successfully, you need to thoroughly understand what is going on in your business, where, what data is produced, what result is wanted, and so forth. And actually, I've seen stories about how when companies start to do this thinking, they wind up streamlining, I'll use that verb,
Yes.
their organizations because they realize that some areas, some functions may not be needed the way that they were set up previously. That it's a new way of thinking about how the organization works. It's almost a way of cleansing the industrial age, to use our terminology, Tom, and moving the organization into not just the digital age, but the age of AI.
The
And
age of intelligence, right?
yes,
You,
absolutely.
and what, so we all do alerts today, we all do predictions, we all do simulations, but this is where you have the ability to do it within a layer.
Right.
Now, I would just tell a layer of AI. Now, I would just tell you, you need DARPA level, Palantir level, ServiceNow level. You need that level because you need really serious people. There are ways you can tackle this yourself, and we'll get to that at the end. But if you try to do this for every piece of your business at once, you're in dangerous territory. So that is the point about taking and identifying key assets and begin that. But if you start thinking this way, the fact that you don't have to do data migration, you don't have to do data harmonization, you don't have to do data warehousing, you're moving then into a whole different world. There's a lot of other complications that come to this, and that's who should do this for me? Should it be in-house, out of the organization? Where do I house the data? There's all kinds of other issues, and this is why you need smart people helping you with this. But let me just give you an example here of so that you can get this straight. And I can't really go into a lot of the detail here, but if you want to understand how you can execute the Iranian military activity the United States perpetrated, with the complexity of getting that done in a very short time period, adjusting time periods, having every piece work. And anybody who watched General Kane go through, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or the chair of the Joint Chiefs, go through the description of this, what you heard was all this different pieces of the infrastructure that was involved and different aspects. And you thought, how in the world does that get done so effectively? And we'll talk about context awareness in a minute. Then you look at something that was way more complicated, which was the Venezuela operation, where it involved the Army, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Marines. I could keep going. A lot of the intelligence agencies are some of our allies. I don't think I'm giving anything away here. Um, you end up with a massive group of disparate organizations that need to be integrated and constantly made context aware of the moment, but still you're able to execute all this. And at the same time, you're able to do observation. And in this particular case, instead of alerts and so forth, you're actually getting video pictures of what is actually happening on the ground. Or there are other aspects here, and I need to stop at this point. But if you're looking at this complexity of how can you do this, think about it this way. I have a Generation X stealth fighter that's producing data and delivering that in a specific way back. I also have a commercial drone, and I also have Army troops on the ground. I have Coast Guard boats in the sea. I have Navy aircraft carriers. Uh, and by the way, we know there's submarines because you don't have an aircraft carrier without a submarine. How, and these are not, we don't all have the same radios, right? Or the same. How does this all get integrated? So it's the question of how can you take disparate information, some of it structured, some of it unstructured, keep this point about being context aware and being able to predict and simulate on the fly based on the current context and be able to execute things in the order in which they need to be executed. And now infer that back into your business or infer it forward to your business. This is the key. And you got anybody who watched Karp, if you now understand that, you understand. He was talking about the battlefield and all this stuff, but think about it, lift it up to the CEO level where you're trying to manage this as somebody like a Dan Kane or General Kane, trying to make sure, and by the way, he's not making any decisions at that point. It's all being made by others. And we'll talk about later. Then the question becomes, okay, what is the role of the human? What is the role of the agentic AI architecture? But with that, I'm going to stop. Hopefully, you now get a picture of if you can figure this out. And look, I just described to you some situations that are way more complicated than most businesses exist in this world, unless you're involved in that. Um, if they can be doing it, you can be doing it. And if you are not doing it, you're somebody will, right? And so, and you, if you can figure it out, you'll have a huge competitive advantage. I also believe this kind of thinking will penetrate not just the CEO level and not just the top leadership levels, but will also penetrate the boardroom. So, with that, Deirdre, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, I want to pick up what you've been saying because I think your example points very clearly to the need for mindset, which is a theme that you and I have been talking about, that the CEO needs the mindset of being able to think about this sort of work and lead this sort of work if the organization is going to be using AI effectively to deliver results, to deliver ROI. This is why I think a lot of those CEOs were talking about job stability and so forth, that they see that not all of them, frankly, can do the thinking, or let me put it this way, it's not so much doing the thinking, it's understanding that the thinking has to be done
Yeah.
and understanding that everything has to be combined and understanding the role of AI in this. So you have the need of we talk about how in fact, the theme of our 72 series is that AI has already changed leadership forever. This is exactly how you need to shift your mindset to be able to accommodate AI in the organization so that you can do well, I'll call coordinated work, very simplistic term, but a coordinated work so that you can meet your goals, deliver the results that everyone is looking for. I'm also getting a sense here, Tom, and I've picked this up a little bit in the business media, that people are understanding that they can no longer listen to fully the press releases issued by the big tech companies, that they need to be doing their own thinking here. If you simply follow the latest press release, you're going to get confused now. You have to start thinking deliberately about uses. I'm stumbling over the term use cases because you and I have described how use cases alone will drive you into one function or whatever. You have to think in terms of overall uses in this sort of way for the organization. And don't worry about some of the things being said. Don't worry about some of the what I'll call consumer driven social things that are happening. Focus on the business uses of these, and you'll start to develop the mindset where you yourself can talk through what this slide presents for your organization.
Yes, and once you start understanding it this way, and you understand beginning to, we'll talk about in a second, the role of the human in all this, and you decide where that is, you start to realize that this is just like any other technology. It's no different than fire, or and one could call fire technology, but electricity, anything else, communication, can always be used for good and bad. It's about how we as humans manage that process. So this gets into this human machine. This is the leverage multiplier. And now with the machines being more sophisticated in what they do and how they do it, better said, how they do it leading to what they do, you have this ability to multiply. The human role in this, and we're going to use a few words here, it's not complete exactly, but my view is the human has to be the one with the judgment. And I would tell you, my view is the second word is this lead. It's judge and lead, being a good judge of what's going on and then lead in the right way. You are also responsible. Did I move this chart here, Dina? Sorry. You're also responsible for the creativity. Deciding when the machine is more creative than you are, or you're more creative than the machine. This is part of leading. and knowing the difference. And the only way you're going to know that is if you become expert in the field. So if you right, so you shouldn't be leading things you're not at least pretty good at. And then the human has to constantly bring the context and decide, is the context good enough for the moment and the time? You also need to decide, how deep do you refine? And then you have to be the one that makes the ultimate decisions on what's happening here. Just like everything else, you have a responsibility for it all. The role of the machine is to provide scale, speed, and synthesis. The ability to do what tech has not been able to do well in the past, and that is to synthesize various inputs with various activity pieces to it and make coherent sense of it. That's what's going on. And then the other benefit that what tech does is it can then simulate and predict outcomes. And it can also then give you a judgment on those predictions. I'm based on how I think, I'm 80% confident I'm on the right path. And then you have to, as a good leader would do, even if it was a human saying this, you'd say, how did you calculate that? And you want to see it. And this is something we won't get into here, but I'm getting into in the book, is a concept of how do you function with the machine? And you know, Deirdre, you and I both have a bias to say you treat it like anything else, like a
Right.
human being. Because if you start to treat it differently than a human being, you start to sometimes let the machine do the things they shouldn't be doing that you'd never let a human do. So you have to put similar things on it, I think, to manage it and lead it well. But the other thing it does, it processes vast amounts of data that are not coherent by themselves and are not standardized. They can spot patterns and simulate outcomes, and that's just by the way they're trained and designed and trained. Together, you can make huge step forwards. We've tried to prove this to you in a lot of the videos we've been doing for the last year, how you can personally do this as a leader. We haven't tried to tackle the organization yet. Fortunately, we're able to do it now, and start to talk about, okay, now how does this really apply, not just to you? And why did we, Deirdre and Tom, focus so hard on you learning what we're seeing here? Because if you've been following along and doing some of this yourself, not everything, but doing some of it, you can spot the ability to synthesize. You can spot how you can lead and should lead. You can spot how you have to make the decisions. You have to decide the creativity. You have to decide whether the context is good enough or not in that case. But it provides this right here, the scale, the speed, and the synthesis. And I've said before, these models are sitting there waiting for you. You know, rarely are you behind. Now, what you and I do these days, Deirdre, the models, we have to wait for the models.
Right.
How many times have I said to you, I had to do a piece of work and it said, come back in 3 hours, right?
Right.
Now, I'm pushing the models pretty hard, and these are models that you don't even have, some of these you don't have access to yet. Hopefully, you will soon. But that's amazing. So, this is where you get the scale, but it's thinking about the applications this way. And then, if you think about them in terms of key assets, that will never go wrong, right? That will always be vital as long as it's a main part of your business. And if it's not, you should be thinking about that too. We've talked about this where the human focuses on leadership and strategy, where the machine handles the synthesis and scale. You may use the machine to help you with strategy at first to say, okay, well, let's do the research on it. Let's look at various strategies people are using to tackle this. But you are the one that has to make that final decision on what you do. But ultimately, it's your responsibility. What you're looking for from the machine is synthesis and scale. How many times, Deirdre, have we said, both publicly and privately in the work we do, I could never have done this work by myself. I wouldn't have the capacity. I wouldn't have the time. I wouldn't
Right.
allocate the time.
Right.
And I would get bored with it because it would take me 5 months or a year to do it. where I can get this done in a weekend.
Right.
And that's the real issue is you can, if you learn this the way we're talking about learning it, and by the way, we're not talking about this, I just hated this so much. And you and I both experienced this when people would be in our classes and say, would you let me opt out of this? I want to go take a programming class. And we're going, why are you wasting your time on this? Because it's going to be, it's situational for the moment. Yes, it is. You can say, yes, it's vital and this is people doing it. But if do you already know how to program? Yes. Well, if you already know how to program, it's like you've learned what this is about. Today, you listen to the CEO of Anthropic. We use Claude a lot, Claude and Grok. When you listen to him talk, he says, "Look, we're not gonna have any software programmers. They call them something else. We're not going to have any of those in our company. We're going to have people that manage that process using our technology to do the software creation." So it gets back to what are you looking for? You're looking for judgment, creativity, context awareness in the human. They're going to be designing, refining, deciding, leading, and the machine is going to be providing the scale, the speed, and the synthesis. Uh, and then ultimately, and these are not our numbers, by the way. This is from Davos, 20 to 50% gains in the actual work, the productivity. And then there's a resilience advantage because you're not relying so much on just individual human beings. And on top of that, you're also can, if it's well done, you can remain context aware. You're vital about the current time. Now, this is where we heard this at Davos a lot, Deirdre, where invest in people along AI for true value. What they, I'm not sure I know what they meant, but I know what I mean. I mean, learn this, right? Learn
Right.
this stuff. You don't have to be a software engineer to learn this, but learn what this can do for you if you use it as a capability that you can control, a strategic capability for your company that I believe has every bit the significance that the internet had. And most people, hopefully, listening to this were not around then. They were in grade school or they weren't even born. But that period was dramatic for a shift.
Right.
And I think this is even a greater shift. I will get off my soapbox, Deirdre, and turn it over to you now.
All right. Think about what I was saying just a few minutes ago about mindset. I find when I'm out talking with people about AI and this sort of usage of AI, that they still think about these AI models as technology tools, something like a new version of Word or Excel or something like that. When you're thinking about these models simply as something that gets downloaded on your computer and you use for, say, advanced search or for combining two documents or something like that, you're clearly not thinking about the type of usage that Tom and I have been talking about. Think about the CEO in our scenario. Do you think that person is capable of doing the human role in a human machine partnership? Does this person have the judgment, creativity, and context to actually lead, refine, and decide? This is why we keep saying that leadership has changed, that you are going to have to rethink your role as a leader of an organization to not simply regard technology as advanced word processing, but to advise, to view technology as a leverage multiplier to multiply the results of your organization. And then what do you have to do that? You have to lead the machine in doing so. Tremendous mind shift here. tremendous learning that has to be done by CEOs, which Tom and I, by the way, and you've heard us say this, think really can only be learned when you get in and start using these models yourself. So you start to see how powerful they are, how they respond, what types of information they create, what functionality they provide, and so forth. So in our scenario, you see how much is missing before this organization can even really talk about using agents effectively in the organization. Okay, back to you, Tom.
Well, it moves to the next way of thinking about this. And again, this is the way that it was portrayed at Davos. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but on the revenue side, it was about dynamic pricing, customer prioritization, which yields a result of higher wins. Then there was predictive maintenance and inventory optimization, working capital. We've seen that already. That's what the supply chain folks have done a tremendous job with. Unfortunately, they were hampered by rigid systems. Think SAP. This is what they did it through standardization. Now being able to do the same work that they've done, but do it in a much less restricted way changes the dynamic. And that's going to be also a real trick, is going to be to take these areas that have benefited from this standardization and now open up their thinking. So if you spent your life certifying in CRM, the real trick for you now is to open your eyes to what the layer of AI can do to help take your way of thinking about the world to the next level, because that's the way the rest of the organization needs to think. The people that have certified themselves in the supply chain world, that thought process can be incredibly valuable, but you have to break through that mindset that Deirdre was talking about into the new mindset. I believe this question of decisions is what really matters here. And this talked about the various decision making. But what I'd really like to get to, this is another one of these slides that try to just take a moment and say, all right, what are we talking about one more time? Siloed data that slows decisions versus connected assets that leads to better insight. Reactive firefighting versus proactive opportunity capture. And it's that opportunity capture idea that is really the point here. Pilot heavy limited scale, and then what limits the scale and creates the pilot heavy is number one, it's thinking functionally, and that way you do a lot of pilots, and then limited scale because you've done that and because you think that way. This is enterprise leverage, compounding ROI. But instead of the problem with the enterprise, which we've always faced in doing these things, even in the entrepreneurial things that you and I have done, Deirdre, it's we couldn't really do this way because we lack this layer of being able to harmonize the data automatic or synthesize the data rather than have to force the harmonization. And you don't have the money or the skills or the time to harmonize data. So you have to end up building a spreadsheet that tries to do it for you. And then you've got a lot of management time spent on functional management time spent on collecting and making sense of that data. And what we're doing in these videos is showing you that you don't have to do that anymore because we're showing you examples of where you're letting the machine do this harmonization for you, right?
Right,
Making sense of the data for you, not
right.
harmonizing, making it useful. And if you can get yourself to think about it this way, you take out some of this anxiety. And I believe the anxiety of using this and all the hype concerns about it taking over the world and doing bad things, it's clear those are really valuable and valid points. But when you're heading it up, when you're using it, you're the one that's in charge of it and you're leading it and you've decided where it can make the decisions and where it can't. That puts confidence back into what you're doing. Any thoughts about this, Deirdre, before I move on?
No, I think this is very obvious and a very simple way for people to see what we're talking about. So please proceed.
All right. So if you would have said today, all right, I want to try to do this, I would say whiteboard out the most valuable assets you have in the business and the key, the data that they present, they create that is important to running the business. And then how do those interact? How do they interact? Right. And this is this take one high impact connection and map out the details. And then measure what the results you want by the top level results, meaning did it increase revenue? Did it reduce costs? Did it increase speed? Because that's what you're really looking for. You need to be able to connect it to the end result. If you cannot, or generate more cash, right? If you cannot do that, you're too low, right? The asset isn't most important enough. Then it's clearly critical, but you haven't really reached the one that you need to get to. And then the others feed into that. Uh, then you scale by adding assets in that network, right? That's how you scale. You don't just do another one that is disconnected. You find a way to scale within that network, and hopefully, if you've designed it well, you already know what the second most important asset for you to help with scale and help with returns is. And then you have to treat it as a living capability, meaning you have to use it to run your business. If you think about the examples I gave of the situations that were global situations, they were using it at those moments and they were communicating on it, with it, and using it. That's why they know when they're talking about interdicting on the high seas of some situation. To Karp's point about transparency, and he called it civil liberties. I wouldn't have used that term necessarily. He's talking about a specific case of, well, if you're making your decisions on a platform like this, they're there. So we now know what was the criteria for you to decide to offer this particular person some medical care versus somebody else. What criteria did you use? And if you now realize you are now being subjected to potentially in the path of that, somebody coming back and auditing your decisions for that. Notice how they did. They had, one member of a former group I'm involved in come in and testify to Congress about why did he make the decisions he made. It was a closed door thing. We couldn't hear about it, but everybody came out and said, okay, I got it. Well, it wasn't just him talking. They showed what he was doing when and why, right? And you found out who was making those decisions, and it wasn't who they thought it was, who they were trying to decide. Who, by the way, wasn't the right person to make those decisions. He was. So anyway, that's the idea. It changes a lot about the sophistication of the running a business, in my view. And this is why, Deirdre, I believe that as you begin to go down this path, it will change who's going to actually run these businesses. Now, are you still going to need the person who's a hardcore salesperson, who's got some technical chops? Yes. Are they going to be the CEO? No. And this is my argument about when somebody asked me about something not long ago from a board I went off of. I said, he'll do fine for the moment. But that's not the person that's going to need to be there in 18 months. And I can promise you it's been a year and it won't be, right? Because he doesn't have the right skill. There is a woman in the business who's actually running marketing, who should be the next. She understands this stuff. Now, uh, and this is a for-profit board, dude, not a not-for-profit.
Right.
That's a different problem. But this, I think, and also on the not-for-profit side, there are most of those board members, they should not be on that board. They don't understand where organizations of the future are going to have to go to be competitive, whether you're for profit or not for profit. They don't understand it. And they're also going to be tech posers. Those are people who try to pose as being technical people. Maybe they were lower level skill, maybe they're consumer capable, maybe they're programmers, whatever, but they don't understand the theory, the strategy of the use of technology, because that is changing at the moment. Doesn't mean a lot of those people, we know some that are great programmers who have shifted into this work and actually running companies and building companies. But the people who truly understand this, and this is your point, Deirdre, about the role you were playing as the CEO in this scenario, you just don't think she has the makeup for it. And I agree with you, unfortunately. I hate to say that. I just don't think she has the makeup for doing it. We saw this before, and we saw this in the internet age when people were expected now to be using platforms instead of not platforms for doing things, physically doing things versus using electronic platforms. That was the
Right.
internet age. There are a lot of people that never made that transition. Did they last 10 or 15 years? Yeah. But the speed that things are moving now, Deirdre, I don't believe that you'll have that kind of time frame. I think you'll be given a runway of 3 or 4, maybe if you're lucky, 5 years, maybe. But the boards in 5 years and the CEOs, the people running these companies, and who knows whether they'll even call them CEOs, I don't know. They will look very different
Mhm.
than what they look like today.
Necessarily so, Tom, because you and I talk about the CEO is in charge of strategy. And to many people, that means creating a static strategy that lasts for a year and then you review it at the end of the year and so forth. When you're talking about living capability, you're talking about a strategy that changes by the day. Or in a large corporation, maybe not the day, but by the week.
Yeah.
That you look at results, you have actions planned every week to keep the company moving forward. This is a major, and again, it's a mind shift thing. Can this person shift from a standard structure into this new way of working? And my sense is that our unfortunate CEO, my character, just cannot make that shift. Not when she took time to get her management team to work on AI agent implementations in their functions, but not across functions.
Right.
She just doesn't get it. She's thinking old.
Yes.
Anyway,
Absolutely. And if you need a model for this that you still don't get this, think about politics today.
yes,
Who's going to win? What's your biggest complaint? How many times can I even pick up the phone and talk to you every day, Dieter, where you don't say that somebody's got a messaging problem, right?
yes.
And
Oh,
it mostly
yeah,
has to do with not doing something they should do, right? And it
correct,
has to do with timing.
correct,
Now, when you understand that the world in politics has changed, that
correct.
you have to be a living capability. You have to be context aware constantly. Incredibly hard to do, especially if you're the leader of any country today or any major organization. It's really tough. I mean, I feel badly for Jamie Dimon. Right? This is one of those take away what your politics are, whether you're, and I don't even know if he even has been very clear about this. I mean, it's always been more on the liberal side than conservative side, but he's a great person and he's built really good companies. But on one side, he's got, you know, part of the groups and part of the time, the same people who are now suing him for debanking them back 5 years ago, they're also saying, hey, we need your help in Gaza, right? I mean, it's just the hardest thing to bridge those gaps in current environment. By the way, both of those might be right. I don't know. You and I try not to make those judgments. We're just trying to say, this is what's happening. Now, what does that mean when we think about doing things, right? But
Right. But what you've been talking about for the past 2 minutes is the need to forget how things were done in the past.
Yeah,
Understand that things will be done differently going forward. But more than that, to get beyond the cliches, too many people will jump from the way things are done to a cliche of how things are done in the present. But that's old already. You have to think through all aspects of what you want to accomplish and how you get there. And that's what this living capability does for you. It gives you the ability to act and change and make changes and ask more questions, make more decisions, use these right tools, pursue the data, use your assets properly to get to where you want to go. And that again is a big shift in mindset that leaders have to accomplish. Leadership has changed, as we keep saying.
it has. And if you just go to the last chart here, one thing that we did was to say, let's just explode the first point, just so people get exactly what it would take. And so if you just go one level further on the first point, it's you determine those interrelated assets in the data, you map their interactions, you think about the synthesis layer for the data and interactions, and you start looking at what would that layer look like to you. And then you're looking at the objectives of that output because there's a spectrum of objectives. This is the point that's really important to try to understand. And this is the point that we've been trying to make in this video about agentic AI. Agentic actions are where the actual technology is taking a decision and doing something with it. So this is its own actions. It's acting on its own behalf, and it's coming back and saying, "I just did this." That is what agentic AI is about. It's about, and we see it. You can look at agentic AI in ugly forms, but my way of thinking about it in the ugliest form possible in human nature today is a voice assistant trying to help me solve a problem on the telephone or on a chat. You're laughing because I've been dealing with this. On a chat situation, they're trying to tell me how to solve these problems. And I can't tell you, this is going, I'm not going to give you, but vendor left and right. I push technology. And you get in this do loop of the most recent one was where I was told, you can do this, you should be doing this capability online, and then cutting me off. So I go online and it won't let me do it because I'm after hours, and that's because I'm at a different time zone than there. I mean, you talk about, and by the way, even when I got back on, you still couldn't complete it that way. You needed to talk to somebody about it because they wouldn't let you authorize moving money around. I mean, it's maddening. But what's happening is that's an agentic AI. It's functioning and making its own decisions. Now, the opposite end of that is decision support. That is where you're offered alternatives. And those of you that have been following the way that we manage our data here is we want them all to come to us, right? For this, the work you and I are doing, which is we've been modeling out strategic work and those kinds of things. We don't want it making its own decision. We want it to tell us what the options are and let us go back and say, and by the way, we actually ask it to tell us what is your preferred option. Not only what the options, what is your preferred and why? And what's your confidence interval in that recommendation? Or what's your confidence interval in each one of those actions? We do that so that we can understand what's behind all this. I I would say 6 out of 10 times, I'll say, please proceed. I agree with you. Your option's best. Just go. Where a lot of times, the other time, I'm redirecting in a completely different direction or some modification on it. And we've done so many videos on this. You've seen me do this, or Deirdre telling me to do it because I manipulate the models for us because it's easier. I have the more capable models. But be that as it may, that's what you're talking about. You have a spectrum of results coming out of that layer. That spectrum of results are, I've already done this, or here are some options, and you have 10 seconds for me to be able to execute this. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time and I'm going to have to reallocate, right? This is the military, the actions that we talked about, the global actions we talked about, or intelligence actions. It gives you time periods and gives you the warning that we only have so long to go. Things like that. Or it doesn't make the decision at all and just gives you all the parameters around the decision, says it's up to you. You tell me what you'd like me to do, if anything, right? So you have to start thinking that way. So that's why my point about agentic AI, you'd be driven to agentic applications because it sounds great. And it sounds like something that a vendor would like to do for you. They'd like to come in and turn some of these things, automate some of these decisions. The question is, are you ready to do that, right? And have you thought this through? I mean, my comment about this to almost anybody, if I'm sitting there and I'm getting frustrated with an agentic application on that's providing me some result, and I'm frustrated by it, shame on you. That means that you haven't had one of your serious leaders sit down and try to do this or being taken through how someone uses this. Um, and that is on you, not on the user. And this is where you get yourself, I believe, in trouble, and why, as a board chair, I was heading Deirdre as CEO in that role play away from letting her go do that until we understood, okay, let's talk about this spectrum of decisions that an AI layer can add at a high level to an organization to make it run more effectively and efficiently from beginning to end. And that spectrum being agentic decisions, where it's functioning as your agent, making its own decisions, all the way over to decision support. I will tell you what I know and what I recommend and why, but it's completely up to you. I will completely get off my soapbox now, Deirdre. So it's now back to you. I've dominated the time here.
But this was essential work. Now, we're not going to slip back into our roles. I'm just going to keep explaining for the next 2 or 3 minutes that we have
You
with
want
our
to fire
audience.
her is what you want to do. I know you've been after her before I was actually.
Right. But think about how the CEO, as shown in our scenario, is going to react to this presentation. I think this is beyond the mindset of this CEO, and something to think about how to proceed now. That can this person turn around and talk with her management team, those of the management team who are capable of thinking in this way themselves? We've already said back in the 71 series that some of the management team were not really able to even create simple models or simple projects using simple LLM capabilities. So think about how this company in this scenario proceeds from here. My sense is yes, indeed, that the CEO is going to ask for time, does not know what to do, can't say anything back. And then stay tuned, audience, because when we come back with our next video, we'll take you further in our scenario and show you what the company did.
Yeah, we're actually going to mock up a company. We're going to take a real company and use it and do research on what its key assets are and begin doing this mapping so you could see how it might be done, not so you can replicate it, but so that you can infer how it might be used in your organization. So it won't be a black box to you, but that's going to be 72-2 next week. So I just sit here, Deirdre. You and I just spent almost 10 years at an educational institution of very high reputation. I hope they haven't destroyed that permanently, but I don't think they will. You can't, hopefully. I think through organizations. I've tried to help one of my alma maters think about this strategically. I'm sure if they saw this video, they would probably croak because trying to do this is the way forward, though. And now it's What do you do with the result, right? How do you do this? How do you implement? That's the critical point. Not doing it is just not an option, I don't think. It's a matter of you will either do it now or you're going to do it later. And when you do it later, you're not going to be in as much control of it is the problem.
Mhm. We talked about it, Tom, this past week as transformative AI, that you need the transformative people in the organization to do the transformative work to accomplish what we've just presented.
So it's transformative leadership.
Transformative leadership. Yes, indeed.
It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom. So long for now.